Hello everyone, it's Rebecca here and welcome to today's video. For today I'm going to do a tutorial. I'll have the image up on the screen now of what I'm going to paint with you guys. And this image, it's a seascape obviously with the lighthouse. So what I did is I linked this image below so you guys can go ahead and follow along. It can be found at a website called Pixabay, and they have a lot of royalty-free images, so they're really great to do tutorials with. I don't have to worry about copyright laws or anything like that. So I'll go ahead and have that linked below. And then here's this image again, but slightly cropped, and this is the image I'm going to paint. And I'm painting this one because I didn't quite like how in the original image the lighthouse is fairly centered and the rocks are also fairly centered along the horizon line. And just personally, I think that's not as pleasing as an off-centered image, so I went ahead and cropped it, and as an artist we have the liberty to do that. So let's go ahead and get started with the tutorial. Alright, so I'm going to be using a Prismacolor Coal Erase to kind of sketch out my image. I like these because it will kind of blend in after we do the watercolors. You won't be able to see the sketch lines as easily. You can use a watercolor pencil, works to very similar effect, or of course you can always just use your regular graphite pencil, which I still use quite often. So what I'm going to do is just have my reference image up where I can see it, and this is the one that I have just cropped to kind of be more close to what I want and what I think is a good composition. So I'm first just going to throw in the bottom of those rocks. So it kind of starts about over here, and whoops, let's just turn that off. I'm gonna make this a very simple tutorial for you guys, more of a beginners to intermediate level. So I'm throwing that bottom line, and then I'm just throwing in this foreground rock, and there's another foreground rock over here. Let's see, and now I'm going to do kind of the top of those rocks. So it kind of comes down this way. You see it has a sweeping line here, and then there's kind of a line that goes up this way. Just trying to follow the general lines of the rocks here. And then where the lighthouse is sitting, it kind of bumps up a bit. So go ahead and throw that in. And see how this is very smooth here? I just have some smooth lines, and I'll try to draw a little darker than I normally would so that way you guys can see it better. Normally I would be sketching a lot lighter than this, but so that way that you guys can see it. So I have some very smooth lines here. Obviously the rocks are not smooth, they have jagged edges everywhere, so I'm going to go ahead and start just adding a few of those lines, just some suggestions. Most of that work will be done with the actual paints. But just to help me kind of know that these are not smooth edges here. And here I'm not really following the picture too carefully. As long as I get the idea that there are rocks here, I am happy with that. So just quickly throw those in. And I'm holding my pencil, as you can see, from the very tip, and that just helps me get more loose and more expressive lines. I write normally, like when I'm writing a letter or whatever, I write like this. And they always tell you that you should hold the pencil or the paintbrush differently than you would when you are writing, because you have muscle memory from writing so long that your lines will not be as expressive. So I hold mine back here when I'm doing the sketching. So like I said, just throwing in some lines here to make it look more like rocks. And there's no real way of doing this. It just comes from practice trying to draw rocks and get those lines in. Okay, so I did that, and now I'm going to do the top one here. And I had made this kind of a dome shape, but really it comes up and then it's rather flat up here. So I'll kind of add more of that shape in. And then along here, along the edge where the water meets the rocks, it's not a straight edge. There's lots of little think that's also rocks, but they look like they have barnacles on them. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of add some rocks along the bottom. Again, just kind of making some shapes, making sure everything is not the same, kind of doing different shapes along the edge here. Alright, I think that's good enough. And of course, more of this will come together when we do the paint. This is just for our reference. So, for the water, I'm going to go ahead and just add some lines of which way the water is going. So we kind of got ripples going over here, a line this way. And again, this just kind of helps, so that way when we're doing the paint, we know which way the water is flowing. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and add in, I am going to erase this top line here a little bit. I usually don't erase in the sketches, but that line was just a little dark for my liking. I don't think that would have I don't think I could have hidden that with the paint. So now I'm going to go ahead and add just some of those background mountains in there. Now I want to be very careful. You see here how this is the top of this is where my lighthouse is going to be sitting, right here. I don't want the mountains to come up past that, because you can see in our reference image the mountains don't come up to the top of that hill. So that is really the only thing I'm worried about here, because I think I started to draw them a little too high. And these are just going to be our background. There's nothing too special about them. They're not going to have a lot of detail, so just throw in some ideas of mountains in the background there. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and throw in our lighthouse. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to start actually with the straight line to about where I want the lighthouse to go, which is about there. Go ahead and get some of this off. So that's about where I think our lighthouse should go. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in where I think that top part would be, where the kind of the railing is. I think that would be about here. And then where I think the end of the red stripe would be, the white stripe, and then kind of that little bump halfway down the red stripe. So that just kind of gives me an idea of where everything will go, so that way my proportions stay correct throughout the whole drawing process. So now I'm going to go ahead and just add in kind of the size that I think that it should be. And make sure to make, you know, round shapes here. You don't want to have a flat line across. You want it to be round, so that way it looks like you're going around a lighthouse. So I'm going to go ahead and up until my railing, draw just a nice line down. Just like that. Just so that way we have a straight looking lighthouse, even though this lighthouse is not too straight in the picture. It looks a little, it's an older lighthouse, it looks like it's a little bit curved. Alright. Actually, I drew this line without really paying attention to my reference photo. But actually, you're looking from below up at the lighthouse. You're kind of like the viewer is down low, or maybe probably on a boat where this picture was taken. So actually, the lines curve this way, like up. And I had drawn that first line curving down. So then I'll have to fix this line and curve that line up as well. So now I have the basic outline of my lighthouse here. And I'm going to go ahead and add in the actual lighthouse part. So first we have a little bit of an overhang where I think the railing goes, and then they have the actual light part of the lighthouse. We got that guy. We got it going around like so, and it's black on the bottom. It's got so when you're doing a complex shape like this, just break it up into smaller shapes. So right now I've just done circles and lines, or curved, well really just lines, curved lines and straight lines. And then I'm going to do just a half circle here for the top of the lighthouse, just like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and add the little ball shape that is on top of the lighthouse. And that's really it. So now this part of the lighthouse is obviously glass, so we're going to be able to see on the bottom here the black of the top showing through. And then there's going to be the light inside, and that's pretty much it for the lighthouse. Oh, we have the railing, so let's go ahead and add that guy in. Alright, so I'm just going to add some suggestions of bricks by just going with the same direction of the lighthouse, adding in some lines. And I'm also going to try to erase that middle line just a bit. It's not too big a deal if it's there, but just to get it out of the way for us. And then I'm just going to draw some kind of tick marks down. And that kind of just gives the suggestion of brick. And of course, when we paint this guy, we will kind of add some more suggestions of brick. And I usually don't sketch in clouds because I like to have a line-free sky without any kind of delineation for the clouds. But if you do want, you can just kind of sketch the bottom of the cloud. So I'll go ahead and do that today. So we'll just sketch the bottom of that one cloud. Bottom of the cloud coming from there. And there's a cloud kind of coming up from over here. And that's usually, if I do anything, that is all I'll do. So, alright. So we're going to go ahead and start with the painting. I have my paint palette here so that way you guys can watch as I paint and see what colors I'm using and how I mix and all that. Because I know when I first started, that was something I really liked about YouTubers that would show their palette. It would help me kind of know how they're mixing. So when I'm painting, I usually like to start with the background and kind of work my way forwards. If there is something like a lighthouse or some kind of object to focus on, like a center of focus, I will actually usually leave that for last. So I'll start in the background, and then when I get to this middle ground here with the lighthouse, I'll actually skip the lighthouse, finish everything, and then come back and do that. And our sky is a light blue. It gets very light, almost like a white color down near the horizon line, and there's some actually very bright blues on the underneath of the clouds. So I'm going to go ahead and mix, and this is a phthalo blue, and it's a very bright blue. To mix some of that, I'm going to add some ultramarine in, kind of tone it and make it a little bit more natural. Phthalo blue can look a little, it doesn't really fit into landscapes all that well. If you just use it on its own, it's usually a little too bright to be realistic unless someone who's taking the picture has the camera's contrast or have kind of bumped up the contrast to a little bit more. Added a little bit of burnt sienna here. Alright. So now I'm going to go ahead, and when you're doing a sky, usually the best bet is to not focus too much on where everything goes. Once you start, it's usually just best to kind of finish it out. So look at your picture first, kind of know where you want things to go. That's why maybe some of you want to have these lines here to kind of have ideas of where you want the bottoms of clouds. But really just to kind of go for it. And, you know, no one's going to know if the sky is a little bit different than your reference image. So I'm going to try not to get anything on my my lighthouse here. If you guys like masking fluid or know what that is, you can always use that to help you. But I'm just going to work around it for today. And what I'm doing is trying to do like the tops of some of those clouds we see there. And I would suggest a larger brush for this, just so you can keep your sky a little bit more loose and a little bit more natural looking. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come along and just kind of soften that bottom edge, because these are going to be the tops of clouds, and the tops of clouds are usually pretty wispy and don't have clear edges. So now I have that top line there. And I'm going to kind of go and pick out where I want the sky to be peeking through the clouds. And there's no real way of doing this. I usually just like to pick out some areas, looking at my reference picture, seeing where I think the tops of clouds and the bottom of clouds are, and where that sky is peeking through. And then when we get to the bottom here, like I had said, it's a very, very light color. So what I'm going to do is, when I get something down here near the bottom, I'm going to take my brush, get a lot of water on it, just go to the tip of our color here, get that really nice and wet, and then just paint on some very faint color here. Very faint color. Almost like tinting the paper. And I'm going to go ahead and add that to the other side since I got that color on my brush. Alright, now I'm going to go back to my full color here, and then just keep adding in areas. And as your paint gets lighter, as it will because you're running out, just add some color, some dots. Now here's the thing that I remember when I first started painting would always have me worried. I just ran out of paint color here, but like I had said, you want to kind of work quickly. So don't worry too much, just go ahead and grab the essentials of the colors that you have. So just grab that ultramarine, that phthalo blue, grab that ultramarine, grab that burnt sienna, and don't worry about how close it is. Just once you got it, go ahead and go right back in, and you can alter it if you need to. So on this side of our reference image, the sky is pretty light, so I'm going to go ahead and just even that out. And it's okay if you get this on the rocks, because this is a very light color we have down here, and it's not really going to affect anything. Alright, so I'm going to take our color here and add a little bit more of that ultramarine, and a little bit more of that. So this is burnt umber. So now I'm going to get a mixture of ultramarine and burnt umber until we get a dark blue. I'm going to add a little bit, just a tiny bit of that phthalo blue, just so we can keep that color the same. So now I have a much darker mixture to that first mixture I had, and I'm going to add the bottoms of the clouds. Just like so. And this bottom of the cloud is, I think, the darkest, I would say. And it goes right up to the lighthouse. And then I have one here. And now if your clouds had ended up a little bit different than your reference photo, just add this to the bottom of where your clouds ended up. It's no big deal. And then usually clouds are pretty flat towards the horizon line on the bottom. Usually they don't tilt up like this. So I'm going to go ahead and just add that flat bottom there, so it's parallel to the horizon line. It makes it look a little bit more realistic. And then I'm also going to take this color and throw it up here on the top where everything is just a little bit darker. Now I'm going to go ahead and rinse my brush. Just get some water, feather out those edges on the top. Now I paint in a very kind of juicy and wet watercolor way, so if you don't like the blooms that I get here, just don't add as much water and kind of smooth it out. And I'll show you that in just a second, how to avoid that. You can still get them, but I actually like the way they look, so I almost encourage it, and the way I paint creates a lot of them. But yeah, that's something that you can learn to avoid if you don't like it. So if I didn't want to what they call blooms here, I would take my brush, pat it on a paper towel or on a rag, whatever you have, until it's dry, and then just kind of pick up that extra water, and that will keep it from creating a bloom, usually. Alright, so now I'm going to take that mixture we have here and just water it down. And this is how I'm going to create some shadows in our clouds to make them look not just like white splotches in the center here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to actually need a little bit more color than that. You don't want it to be water, you want to be able to see it. You just want it to be pretty light. Just kind of create some marks, like little U shapes. Just to create some shadows, because clouds really aren't just white. Kind of smooth out that line I had created there. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is go back to that color, mix it up so that way you have a medium tone now. And just kind of add in, and just kind of play with it until you get the color you want. So these are, I think that these should be 2 clouds. So I'm going to kind of create a barrier there. Now what I'm going to do is I want a little bit more of that dark color. So I'm going to go back in with my ultramarine, a little bit of phthalo blue, my burnt umber. There's not too much water on my brush, so I didn't have to create that much to get a darker color. And now I'm going to add just some of those wispy clouds. They're kind of in the bottom here. And I think that helps tie the image together nicely. So clouds, as they get to the horizon line, will actually be a lot smaller. So your bigger clouds will be near the top and your smaller clouds will be at the bottom. And that's because as things get closer to the horizon line, they get smaller and farther away. So you know when you're looking at the sky, that's closer to the horizon line. If you're looking at the ground, that's closer to the horizon line. So I'm going to add some of these just darker shapes here for clouds. Make sure you have things that look like they're going behind your lighthouse, so that way everything kind of fits into the image. Just have little tiny little marks here just to show some clouds in the distance. Alright, now if you look at our reference image, we have a little bit of some like pink colors in there, just where the sky, I think it's like the sun reflecting, and I think I want to add that in there just so that way our image won't be completely warm colored. I mean, won't be completely cool colored. I like to have warm and cool colors in all my paintings, even ones that are predominantly cool colored like this one here. So let me just add in a few more of these, and I can usually go overboard with this, so I'll try not to do too many here. So for that pink warm color I had mentioned, I'm going to use I think they call this permanent rose. It's just a rose colored pink color. If you don't have that, you can just use a red and water it down quite a bit. So, but I'm going to use this pink color here, and I'm going to take it into a new mixing area and have it pretty light. I want it very subtle. So I'm going to go ahead and take that here, and I'm going to add that to the tips of my clouds. Just kind of running it along the tips of the clouds here. And then I'm going to smooth it out. Just a hint of a warm pink color coming through here. So once I've kind of gotten it to my clouds, I need a little bit more. I'm going to add it over here, over top of the blue. And then I'm going to add a very faint line here on the horizon. I'm going to clean my brush, dry it off on a paper towel, and then go back over that line and smudge it out. You'll want to make sure that your clouds are dry while you're doing this. You don't want to smudge them out when the clouds are wet. Just so that way it creates almost like a hazy pink color. Alright, and that's all that I have for the sky. So I'm going to go ahead now and make sure everything's dry here. So do the mountains. If you have any of that darker sky color left over, you can go ahead and use that to begin your mountains. What you're going to do is take ultramarine, that burnt umber, and mix that together. And ultramarine and burnt umber, when they mix together, create a color that's called Payne's Gray. That's a very popular color, and if you have it in your palette, you could use a Payne's Gray instead of mixing it, but I like to mix it because then I can have varying shades, more blue toned, more brown tones, so you have a cool tone and a warm tone that you're mixing together, and you can kind of shift it to one way or the other, but it is technically a Payne's Gray what we're mixing here. So when you have a mixture that's equal parts warm and cool, you get this neutral gray that I've created here, and I actually want mine to be on the cool side. So if you're working with Payne's Gray, you can just add a little bit of ultramarine or whatever blue you have to create it a little bit on the cool side, or if you're mixing like I am, then you can just add a little bit more of that ultramarine to create a nice dark but cool gray color. So as we can see when we're looking at our reference image, the mountain that is closer to us is actually quite a bit darker. So since I have this color here, I'm going to go ahead, and this would be my darker color because I can always add water to lighten it up. I'm going to go ahead and do that foreground mountain first. So I'm going to go ahead and just first, I like to just add the top line because that just helps me create a nice smooth line for the top of the mountain. Then just go ahead and fill it in. And you want to make sure that when you're doing the lines for our foreground rocks, that you're not going to just have a straight line across, because again, like I had said, that these are some rocks here, so you want to have a jagged line to just show some rocks. And it doesn't have to follow the reference image exactly, we're just trying to create a picture here, not an exact copy. Alright, and that is our first mountain, our first background mountain. And you can see it's a nice gray color, but it's a little bit on the cool side, it's a little bit more blue. So I'm going to go ahead and while I'm letting that dry, which that will take a little bit to dry because it is pretty wet, I'm going to go ahead and mix our color for the mountain behind that. So I'm going to add a little bit more blue because it is a little bit more blue. And I'm actually going to add just a touch of that phthalo blue because it's going to pick up some of the colors in our sky because it's farther back. Clean off my brush so that way I'm not having all that dark color in there. Add a little bit of water to our mixture. Alright, so now I'm going to just wait for this to dry, and when it's dry I'll come back and we'll go ahead and do our second mountain. Okay, so this is pretty much dry. It might be a little bit damp, but I think it is good enough to go ahead and start. So I'm going to go to my blue-gray mixture here. Just get a little bit of it on the tip of the brush. Before we start, we're going to go ahead and look at our reference image real quick. In that later one, it can look like on the tips, it might be reflecting some of that pink color. So we're going to try to leave a little bit of white up here at the top so we can add in some of that pink color from the sky. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and do that top line, but right here I'm going to leave a little bit because I want that to be that pink kind of shining here. And just do kind of some sweeping lines for where our top of the mountain range is. Kind of following along the reference image. And I think my color might be a little bit on the light side, so I'm probably going to go back in and darken it up later, but I do like to start lighter than starting too dark. Alright, so I think that's a good start for the back mountain range. And I left a little bit of a white mark here where I'm going to add in that pink. So I'm going to go, and I have this color, which is a sap green color, but any kind of neutral, just a green color will work. I'm going to add that to my brush and just mix that in here with our mixture of blue and brown. And it kind of creates this dark sage green color. And I'm looking at my reference and it's still a little bit more blue than that, so I'm going to take that ultramarine that we've been using and add that. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to flat if you have a flat brush. So this is a 1/2 inch flat brush that I'm using here, and it's just a regular cheap, I don't even know, these probably came in one of those packs, nothing special. And load that green color we have. And flat brushes just kind of help you create the edges of the rocks by making these kind of movements. They just look more natural to the rocks. So I'm going to go ahead and add just some lines in here. This can almost work as a highlight color for us because it is a nice light color that almost looks like it's reflecting some of that sky. So I've been doing some diagonal strokes, but you want to make sure you mix it up. So now I'm going to add in some other lines. Kind of following, when you think you see a rock, you just kind of add whatever you think would add to that rock. Just adding some nice jagged edges. And looking at my picture, I can kind of see like almost lines of green color that kind of go up towards our subject, the lighthouse. So I'm going to go ahead and add those in. And I sped this up, but this is just me adding in that color to the rest of the rocks. So I think that was a good highlight color that we used there. And I'm going to go ahead and mix a darker version of that. So I'm going to take some ultramarine, some sap green, get a nice dark color, add that burnt umber. Don't add too much, I definitely got too much in my brush there. And I'm just looking for a fairly dark green here, so you just mix those two. Don't add too much water on your brush, that way you don't dilute the color too much. And I got a nice dark green here, but I want it a little bit more muted, so I'm going to add that brown. It's still very, very green, so I'm going to add a little bit more blue. I'm looking almost for like a gray green. I think that's what I got here, and it's fairly dark. So I'm going to go ahead and add that darker line here. Just kind of turn my brush, get all these shapes that we can kind of see. And see how that's starting to look like rocks now, just barely. So we're going to keep going here. And as you see, as it gets a little bit closer to us, it starts to look a little bit more blue there. So I'm going to take some of that ultramarine and just mix it to our mixture here, or add it to our mixture here. Just until we get a little bit more of a blue tone. Just keep adding small amounts until you get the color you want. And my mixture had gotten a little dry, so I'm going to add just the tiniest bit of water. I don't want to dilute it too much here, just want it to help it flow. And now I'm going to add that to our more foreground rocks. I think it needs still just a little bit more blue, so I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more blue to our mixture. And it's just playing with the mixtures of these colors we've been using until we get the right amount. And make sure you have enough water in your brush here. See here where it starts to look a little bit streaky? It's because I didn't have enough water on there. So I'm going to go ahead and keep just adding this dark color in. And I want to make sure to add it to the top here because even though it's more predominant down here, you want to have it throughout your whole rock structure. I'm kind of using it to outline here where that other rock structure was coming up. And I went ahead and sped this part up as well. I was getting a little bit rambly, but I'm just adding the darker colors along the bottom and in the crevices of the rocks. So now what I'm going to do is, now that we got some of these blocky lines here from our flat brush, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to a round brush. Just so that way I can get the detail that I like. I like to have a fine edge and work with detail. But the flat brush did a lot of work for us to help us create some blocky lines, and it will show up underneath our next layer as rocks. So I'm just looking at a reference image now and kind of deciding what I want to do next. I think I want to go ahead and just focus on this area and getting these rocks over here to completion, and then moving over to these. I'm going to add a little bit of green to the mixture we have. It's just a gray green, so it's going to be fairly light. And I'm just, with the lines that we had created with our flat brush, now I'm just kind of finding them, kind of creating rocks with those lines that we had created. And again, you don't really have to worry so much about it being exact. You know, you just mix colors until you get a dark color that shows up and kind of matches with it, and then you just add some lines. So I'm just adding some lines here to fill in those places and make it look more like rocks here in the background. I've already added some jagged lines for the outline of my rock area. I've already added some blocky areas with my flat brush. And that was really the hard work for me. So now I'm just going through, and I'm going to go back over some of this dark here to kind of darken it up even more. And since I got this color in my brush, what I'm going to actually do is just have pulled this out into the water a little bit and create just some like rocks that might be in the water. Because we have this color on here, we might as well use it just over here in this corner, just so it looks like the rocks are coming out. Makes them look more three-dimensional. And so this area over here is looking fairly green, and I think it needs a little bit more blue to it. So I'm going to take that mixture we've been using, that dark green, and just add some blue. Quite a bit blue. So now it's definitely a blue color. And I'm going to go ahead and add that in there as well. Add that over our dark area, so now that area is getting very, very dark. Adding all those colors really helps make a shadow look realistic, because you have all of theirs now in the shadow. Now we're going to continue and work our way over. So I'm going to take the color now. You might have none left, or you might have just a little bit of a very watery mixture like I do here, and just start over. So I'm going to take some ultramarine, some burnt umber, and if you take it like I am, where there's not that much water on your brush, you will get a very, very dark color like I have here. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of add some shadowy lines in here. Really bring this rock face to life. Again, I'm just kind of finding lines. They're already there for you. Rocks can be a very tricky thing to learn to paint. It's hard because they're so organic, but at the same time they have a very geometrical kind of shape and form to them, so it's hard to get that quite right. Sorry, my cat keeps jumping up on my lap and it's very distracting. She's very cute, but she wants to walk all over my paintings, and that just can't work. So this here is the darkest part of the painting. So don't worry about it getting too dark, because this is what's going to make everything else pop. I'm going to go back over here. I was kind of trying to stretch out the paint a little bit farther, but let's go back over here and finish up this area before we move too far ahead of ourselves. Whatever works for you though. If you are more comfortable kind of finishing it all at once, that's fine too. Oh my gosh, my cat is now inside a box. Oh my. He's very cute, but extremely distracting. So now I'm going to take this color we had and just wet it down a little bit like I had there. And I'm just kind of filling in some of the space, some of that white space. And your eye will kind of do the rest for you. So I had added some dark lines. We had added the lines with the flat brush. Oh my gosh, cat. We're just going to add some of this gray color over top, and I'm going to go ahead and take that pretty far down all the way to the edge here. Alright, and I'm going to mix some more of that dark color so I can finish doing the dark color throughout the whole rock formation. And I'm just using that Payne's gray mixture I had talked about, the ultramarine and the burnt umber, and just pushing it a little bit more towards the blue side. So I'm speeding this part up for you guys so that way you don't have to sit here and watch and listen to me ramble. At this part in the tutorial started to get a little rambly and I was saying the same things over and over again. But here I'm just adding the dark color where it's needed along the bottom where that darker ridge is, and in between the rocks to kind of give the rocks some more form and shadows. I'm also going to be adding a little bit of those rocks that are in the water there. You can see that now. Again, just like we had done before, to give it a little bit more three-dimension. While I have this dark here, I'm going to go ahead and just add it to the top of this rock formation or the bottom of the other one, kind of right in between. That will just help separate the two for us. Just like that. Now if we look at our reference picture, there's not just blues and greens and grays in these rocks. There's also some browns, some tans, and maybe even a little bit of that pink color in some places where it might be being reflected from the sky or the water. So I'm going to add a new color to what we've been using so far, and I'm going to use this, which is a yellow ochre. So I'm going to take some of that yellow ochre. If you just have a regular yellow like this, these brighter yellows up here, what I would do is take some of that and just add a little bit of our burnt umber here, just so that way it tones it down and makes it a little bit more of an earthy color, because this is a very earthy yellow. And I'm going to just add it to some parts of these rocks, just in some nice little washes. And this is called like a glazing. This would be a very basic glazing technique where you're going to be able to see the lines and the colors underneath, and you're just adding a shade or a color on top. That's called glazing. It's very popular in oil paints, but you can do it in watercolors as well. And I'm going to add it over here, just a little bit over here to our rocks that are farther away, but not too much. Then I'm going to add a little bit of a darker brown. So I'm going to add some of our burnt umber to our yellow ochre. And now instead of doing more of a wash, I'm going to do kind of more little lines, kind of around where the washes are, so they'll kind of bleed into that since it's still wet. And that will just kind of make it look a little bit more natural. And I think there might be a little bit of some green, like mossy colors in there, so I'm going to take that mixture we had and add a little bit of sap green to it. And that is too much sap green, so we'll add a little bit more of the yellow ochre. Sap green can be a very overwhelming color, so we get this very green yellow, not very pretty color, but it will work for what we need. Get it so it's going to flow very nicely on the brush. Add a little bit of water if you need to, and again do the same thing, just little lines here and there to suggest other colors or things going on. And as you can see in my picture, I think that's a little harsh. that green. So I'm going to take the, clean off the brush, dry it off on a rag or paper towel, and then just help blend it in. Just tap it around and help blend it in to our rocks here. I think over here I didn't add enough of our brown mixture, so I'm going to take some yellow ochre and add that back in. Alright, and so I think that concludes our rocks. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and do this little rock formation. And since we kind of know what we're going to do, it's going to go really quickly. If you have any of the gray mixture left, you can use that, or you can just mix some more with the burnt umber and ultramarine, leaning it a little bit more towards the blue. And like I had said before, if you're using a Payne's Gray, you can just add blue or brown to change the tone of it. And I had picked up a little bit too much blue there, so I'm going to get rid of that. Alright, so I'm just going to add some lines here where we think the rocks are. Just like that. And then I'm just going to kind of add different colors and keep doing similar things. So I got our mixture here. I'm going to add a little bit more brown. So now it's on the brown side. Add some lines in there with that. And this is how I usually do rocks if I'm doing a smaller area where it's a little bit farther away and less detail. Alright. Now I want to add some of that green color that we had used before, so I'm going to add a little bit of green to that mixture we were just using. And now add some green colors in. Alright, now you get a nice base color there, so I'm going to let that dry and then we'll add some dark tones into that to kind of create the crevices in the rocks. But while we're waiting it for dry, we can actually add a little bit of yellow ochre. Just at the top here, just so that way we don't have to worry about adding that in later. Alright, so now we have the fun part, which, well, at least what I think is the fun part, and that is the ocean here. And we're just going to do a very simple ocean. We're going to even simplify it even more than it is in the picture, because we don't want to take away from our main area of focus, which is these rocks and the lighthouse. So what I'm going to do is take a brush that can hold a lot of water. I'm using this big round brush, which is a synthetic squirrel kind of fiber haired brush. But anything that holds a lot of water, either a mop brush or maybe a big flat brush, maybe like something like this here, or what I prefer are just bigger round brushes. And you're going to mix up a nice pretty blue color. So I'm going to actually use a different section. I do have more mixing sections over here, but because I want you to be able to see it, I'm going to clean up this and mix the blue in here. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up the blue we're going to use in there. So I'm going to take some ultramarine, and I'm going to make quite a bit of this because I don't want to have to worry about it, of us running out of it while we're painting our water. And then I'm going to take some of that phthalo blue that we used up in the sky. It's that really bright neon blue. And then I'm going to add just a touch of the sap green, because you know ocean can be pretty green. At least where I live, ocean is fairly green. We got this nice, almost like turquoise color. Turquoise. We have this nice, almost turquoise color here, which I love. And we're going to go ahead and add quite a bit of that. So I think a lot of the turquoise colors is on this side of the painting. So I'm going to look at my reference picture and kind of see which way the water is going. It's going in this direction. So I'm going to go ahead and just go right in and add a stroke of that. And see how I got nice juicy colors here? I want to try to keep that for as long as possible. So I'm going to go up to our rocks and just add the water in. And I see more of that turquoise color kind of over here as well. Just trying to follow the flow of the water here. Not worried too much about how my strokes look or how they're blending, just following the flow of the water. Alright, so now that's a little bright. Most of the water is not that bright in the reference picture. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of our burnt umber. And since we have that ultramarine in there, it's just going to gray it a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit more ultramarine just so it grays down a bit. Just until I get a nice gray blue with that green that we had in there. Just kind of mixing until I get a nice darker ocean color, and it's a little bit more on the green side, so I'm going to add some of that. Just mix it until you get what you want. And I'm going to go ahead and add some of the ripples into the water that we see. Why this is still wet over here. Alright, and then I'm going to add some this darker color here. And I think this color is a little too green for what I was looking for. But I'm going to go ahead and keep using it. I can always tone it down later. Watercolor is a much more forgiving medium than people let on. And I want my water to stay very loose like this. So my mixture, I thought it was a little green. I'm going to go add some more ultramarine to it. Some more burnt umber until I get a nice gray blue. Yeah, I think that's much better. And I'm just going to add that back over some of the areas just to tone it down, especially up here where the rocks meet, so I want it to be more of a shadow color. Go ahead and add that in. I'm going around my rocks, and we still need to add some of the tops of these rocks here, so leave some white. Just adding the flow of the water here. Right, I need a little bit more of this mixture. I don't think that's enough, so I'm just going to take ultramarine and some burnt umber. Get that gray. And this gray turned out to be a lot darker, but I can go ahead and use that. I can go ahead and use that around the base of my rocks and just add that in. So I made that was darker just because it has a little bit more of the brown in it. And it also doesn't have that much water. Alright, so now that I went ahead and used that, I'm going to go ahead and add some phthalo blue to it to, make it more of that turquoise color that we so love. Add some water. Kind of just fill in those other areas that we still have white. Make sure we're going with the flow of the water with our brush strokes. Now back over in this corner, it's a little bit darker. So what I'm going to do is, it's actually not too much darker in the reference photo, but I kind of want to push it back as well. So I'm kind of, exaggerating the darker colors over in that corner because it's too distracting if we make it the same. So I'm going to add some more of that burnt umber, ultramarine. Are you tired of hearing these colors yet? Until I get a very, very gray color. I'm going to add that along the bottom of our rocks, just a little bit. Then add some more of that ultramarine to blue it up. And go ahead and add that in so we just have this nice dark color in there. Alright, since I have some of that dark color, I'm going to add some ripples in our water. You're just going to look at the reference picture and see which way the water is going and kind of just add a little marks, tiny little marks in that direction. Just helps us kind of figure out in our mind what's going on with this water. And over here I think it's a little dark. I think I exaggerated that too much. So I'm just going to add some lighter color over top of that. Some phthalo blue and some ultramarine. Just kind of warm that up a bit. Because I think that was a little too dark. So I'm going to go back to our rocks up here now and add some gray. So we already had a blue mixture here, so I'm just going to add some burnt umber, a little bit more blue till we get that gray again. This is a pretty watery gray. So I'm actually going to start over because that would be too watery. It wouldn't be dark enough. So I'm going to start over with our ultramarine and our burnt umber, and that will just help us have a darker color so we don't have to be fighting that. And I'm just going to add some of the darker tones into the rocks, especially around the lighthouse, because it would be more of a shadow up there against the lighthouse. Alright. Since I have this dark color, I might as well add it to the bottom of our rocks here where they're touching the water. Got the ones out in the ocean a little bit. And then I can add it along here. And I'm going to keep adding darker colors along here where it's hitting the ocean. Alright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up to this mountain that I had painted, if you remember, and add that color in, that peachy rose color. So I'm going to just take a little bit of it and then just add it up in here, kind of in the mountain range. Alright, so now we get the fun part, and we get to do the lighthouse, which will actually go much quicker than you would think. So I'm going to take a slightly smaller round brush, and I'm going to mix a red for us. And so we want to use similar colors that we have been using. So I'm going to actually use this pink that we've been using, even though that's a much brighter color than we want. And then I'm going to just take our burnt umber and turn that into more of a dark red. And I'm using that rose for it because I don't want to introduce a new color. It's a little too late to introduce a new color. So since I've been using that as our red color, I'm going to continue to use that as our red color and just tone it down with the brown we've been using. So what I'm going to do is add in this color to where our lighthouse is. Now I had a little bit too much paint on my brush, but I don't want to add, I don't want to just dip off the brush in the water and get more paint, because it would still be a lot of paint on my brush. So what I did is I just dabbed it, and then I'm going back on here and just kind of now using the paintbrush to move that paint around. And that helps you not lighten the color of the paint, but not have to deal with so much water. Alright, so we added that first band of red. I'm going to go back, get some more paint, and add our second band of red. And as you can see, this red looks, even though we haven't used a red, this red looks very natural in the painting. It looks like it belongs in this painting, and that's because we used colors we had already used before. So we're not introducing anything new. And that really helps create the painting, create a more harmonious painting. Alright, so actually this bottom part is also red. I don't know why I forgot that, so we're going to go ahead and just add that in as well. And actually adding it second can kind of help because you'll create a line here. That's just because the paint is drying at different times, and you'll be able to see the line, and that can actually help you differentiate two areas that are the same color. Alright, and I'm going to add that top little mark here, this little band of red up here at the top. So now what I'm going to do, because this is pretty much all we're going to use for our red here, so I'm going to take some more of that burnt umber and add it in until we get a very, very brown red. And then what I'm going to do is use a technique that you'll learn in color theory, where you take a complementary color to something, and when you add it, it really dulls it down. It really gets rid of the intensity. So the opposite to red is green. So we're going to take that green that we've been using, just the tiniest bit of it, and mix it in with that red. And you see that really gets rid of the intensity. And this is going to be our shadow red now. So if we look over at our reference picture, this side of the painting is darker. This side of the lighthouse, excuse me, is darker. And that's how the rest of the painting has been. Over here has been darker in general, like with the rocks and everything. So we're going to go ahead and go on that side and just create a line to start on that side of the lighthouse. Then you're going to create a line along the top. So you've created almost a upside down L shape. and then you're going to connect it with the curved line. And that will almost create like a curved triangle. You're going to go ahead and add that to all of the red areas. And if you look up here at their top little red band, that is the darkest of all of them. So I'm going to add quite a bit larger. Then I'm going to go clean off my brush, tap it off, and then I'm going to just kind of smear this edge here. Kind of pull it and push it so that way it's not a hard line, because most shadows are not hard lines. Some are, but most aren't. So now that creates a nice 3D effect, and don't forget this little band like I just did, so I'm going to add this little band there. So that creates a nice 3D effect on our lighthouse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this color while I have it and just add some brick texture. So the way I'm going to do that is take my round brush, if you're using a round, or if you're using a flat, I would use a very small flat brush. If you're using a flat brush, I'd use a small flat brush like this one here. And we're just going to create little marks. So the way I'm going to do it is just do little dashes. And I'm just going to create little dashes. And I'm going to still try to go in the direction, do them slightly curved so they still match the curvature of the lighthouse. Don't overdo it, as I have a tendency to overdo little details like this. Alright, now that you've added the little dashes, you're going to do the little dashes downwards. And that will just help the viewer see that as brick. Alright, so now we're going to do the white part of the lighthouse. And the white part of the lighthouse can be a little bit tricky because it's white and it can be hard to think of what color you're supposed to do that as. But usually white reflects whatever colors are around it. So if you look at ours, it looks like a very light blue-gray. So by now I think we know how to mix the gray. So we're going to take our ultramarine, our burnt umber, mix that until we get a blue-gray. Then we're going to tone that down by adding just a lot of water till we have a nice liquidy blue-gray mixture. And we're going to add that to the side of our white stripe like we would if we were doing a shadow. And then we're just going to kind of blend it out. Tap off our brush and blend it out. And you want the color to get all the way around. And then what you're going to do is take a little bit of it and add it just to the far edge. And blend it out. And that's how you'll create a nice white that looks realistic. So once that's done, we can mix a very, very dark gray so it's almost black. So the way you want to do that is don't have any water in your brush, but go ahead and get some of that brown that's in there. And see how nice and thick that is? Now don't have any water in your brush. Go ahead and get some of that blue. And keep getting this without any water in your brush until you get a very thick neutral gray color. Then what you're going to do is add just the tiniest bit of water just to help this flow, and this should be a very, very dark color which will appear as pretty much black. And we're going to go ahead and add in the details to the top of our lighthouse here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to make one mark and use a smaller brush if you're more comfortable with a smaller brush. This brush comes to a very fine point, so I can get a fine point with it, but if you need a smaller brush, please switch to a smaller brush. So I've added our line across. Now I'm going to add the line for the dome here. Top of the dome. And go ahead and fill that in. You can see how this appears pretty much black. And then I'm going to go ahead and add the little decoration on the top that looks like just like a little ball. And I'm going to add the outside railing edges, just the outside ones. Then I'm going to take our black mixture and water it down just in the littlest bit. And we're going to still try to leave some of the black fairly thick, and so we can go back and get a black color. Now what I'm going to do is just paint the middle section here, just like a little rectangle, and that's just for the bottom of the lighthouse. And we're going to take that same color and kind of add it up on the sides here. And another little rectangle inside. I'll zoom in so you can see that better. So we just added a rectangle here, a little rectangle there, didn't fill it in, and just did some lines to create the feeling that there's glass around there. So this is why we didn't do the full railing, because we want to let that dry a bit before we do the railing through that. So what I'm going to do now is take our black color, and you can skip this part if you're not comfortable with this part, and just add the underside of our black top here, just so it looks like it's going through. And now what I'm going to do is take our black and just draw a part of a line here that would be underneath. This is a very dark shadow underneath this little ledge. And you can also do that down here at the bottom. Alright, so now that that's dry enough here, we're going to take the black and add a line for a railing. And then go ahead and add the little railings in there. Now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that yellow ochre we've been using and just take the tiniest dab and dab it in the center there. Now I'll just add a little bit of a yellow light, looking like it's coming down from there. Alright, so normally this painting would be done if you don't want to add any white to your watercolor, but I like to add white as a finishing touch. So what I'm using is a white gel pen. You can use white gouache, you can use white acrylic if you want. Yeah, so I like to use a white gel pen just because it's easiest for me. And I'm going to just add some highlights. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add a little bit of highlights to this this top of this little dome here. I'm just going to do little lines, just a little line right there, and a little line going across. Just see how that adds. Let me zoom in so you can see that. Just a little line there and here, just so you see how that adds like a little bit more of a 3-dimension. I'm going to add it on that ball there as well. Then I'm going to go ahead and add it just to the top edge of this and part of the railing. Now down here for the rocks, what I'm going to do is add some jagged lines like I would be if we were using paint creating rocks, to add some highlights on the tops of the rocks. And I think that adds a nice little look to it. Now here for the brick, I'm going to add the tiniest little dashes and little downward marks, just like we have been, even doing it on the white. And then I'm going to take my finger and just kind of smudge that out. And I think when you look at that from far away, that just makes it look like some nice little bricks. And right here, I'm going to do the same thing. Add some lines. Not thinking too much about it. Can smudge out if I think they're too harsh. Go ahead and add them over here as well. Add them on your little rocks. And then I'm going to add some here in the water. And the same thing with when you're painting water. You just want to go in the direction that the water's going. Go like this. And that's it. Alright, so that's him all finished. I took the tape off because I think it looks nice with this white border here. The only reason I have the white border is just I wanted him as an 8x10, so I went ahead and taped off an 8x10 size, but any size would be fine. So he's all finished here, and yeah, thank you guys for watching. If you decide to do this tutorial and follow along with me, please tag me. I'll have my Instagram up on the screen. I'd love to see what you guys have done. And also, this is my first tutorial, as I'm sure you guys know, so if you have any suggestions or thoughts on how this went, or any ideas of what you would like me to draw for you guys and have as a tutorial, please let me know. I'm open to anything. Alright, so thank you guys, and I hope you have a great week. Bye.